Now, this is the biggest part of the cerebral cortex in terms of evolutionary process as we see in the humans. And the significance of it in relation to consciousness is that this is the part of the brain that enables us to carry on very complex functions like our judgment in terms of how our environment's reacting to us, and then we decide how we respond to it, or our decision making.
Welcome to another episode of the Hakam Inspire podcast. If you're listening to the podcast for the first time, and as a reminder for our regular listeners, the podcast is available on YouTube, all podcasting platforms, and played on the Voice of Islam UK. With us today, we have Dr Shakeel Ahmad, a consultant psychiatrist who has over 20 years of working in different sub-specialties of adult psychiatry. During this time, he's also served in senior operational roles, including clinical director for General Adult Psychiatry in Surrey, UK, and as chair of the London division of the Royal College of Psychiatrists. He had an early interest in philosophy and development of the human mind, and as an undergraduate, he co-founded an organization to promote creative thinking amongst the youth through self-discipline. Dr. Shakeel Ahmad has also been one of the contributors to the World Health Organization Guide on Mental Health to Primary Care, and he's also been involved in multiple research projects on the Holy Quran within the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community, and is a regular contributor to the Voice of Islam UK radio. Dr. Shakeel Ahmad, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you for inviting me.
Dr. Shakeel, so I want to dive right in and get into the human mind. You, of course, are a psychiatrist, and this element of the human mind is so complex and everyone can relate to it. There's all sorts going on in our mind, even in terms of dreams. And, you know, during the day, we've had a couple of neuroscientists on and we've spoken about brain states and neuroplasticity and all these different things. So we know, I think every human being understands how complex their own brain and their mind is. But do tell us about the development of the human mind. What's the history? What's the philosophy behind it?
Right. Now, that's an interesting point. You know that life has taken about 4+ billion years to evolve on Earth. And as the species or the biological evolution of life has taken place, in fact, the brain or the nervous system was also developing. In fact, the perspective from a cognitive point of view is that the development of life is not primarily an improvement in size or an improvement in our locomotion movement ability. It's more about our consciousness. So in fact, biological evolution was feeding into the improvement in the consciousness of the species as they developed. And by consciousness, I mean ability to relate to our environment, becoming aware of them more and more, and then through our mental capabilities, being able to influence our environment to our advantage. Yes, of course, when we get to the human stage, which is, as far as we know, the most advanced species on Earth at the moment, they have used this consciousness and their awareness and their capability to influence nature, sometimes for the betterment of mankind, but at other times to the detriment of mankind too. But this point still remains relevant, that the evolution of the human brain has in fact been the evolution of consciousness in the species. And you can look at the example starting from small marine life to moving on to fish, moving on to amphibians, then the reptiles, then came the mammals, and then the more advanced mammals. And we are at the peak of the biological evolution, at least up to this stage. Now, one interesting observation that the evolutionary biologists have made is that not just the brain size was growing in relation to the body size, but in fact, it was one particular part of the brain that was growing more in the humans, and that is our frontal lobe. Frontal lobe is part of the cerebral cortex, which is the bigger brain structure that sits inside our head. And the frontal lobe is in the front, just above and our eyes and behind the forehead. And it goes right up to the middle of the head. Now, this is the biggest part of the cerebral cortex in terms of evolutionary process as we see in the humans. And the significance of it in relation to consciousness is that this is the part of the brain that enables us to carry on very complex functions like our judgment in terms of how our environment's reacting to us, and then we decide how we respond to it, or our decision making, abstract thinking, how to make sense of the natural laws. These are the concepts that have been enabled only by a more developed or sophisticated frontal lobe. Now, an interesting example, if you like, I can share with you is that these functions are the ones that we notice when somebody uses certain chemicals, which are intoxicants. So when you use drugs or alcohol, in fact, what do you observe in that person? They lose their ability to judge safely, to relate in an appropriate manner to their fellow human beings. So biologically, or even at a psychological level, drug use or alcohol use takes us back in terms of evolutionary process. It regresses our behavior. So these are the kind of observations that enable scientists to be able to relate the development of the physical brain to our intellectual and social activity or behavior.
Sorry, just one thing in there. So the prefrontal lobe is this is really it's a very new point that I've heard, that we actually, by having these substances, people taking alcohol, they're actually just regressing in terms of the development that their brain has done, because that element in the brain is so important for good judgment, decision making, and like you said, being like a good human being.
That's right. Yes, and it's common observation. Friday nights, A&Es of the hospitals, and Saturday night, they get a lot more patients with injuries because people have had intoxications and they ended up in fights and sometimes really violent behavior towards fellow human beings on small disagreements. So we note, or traffic accidents, relationship problems or breakouts or domestic violence, it's very heavily associated with intoxicants. So, but the point here is about the relationship between the development of the cortex and how sometimes we interfere with what is expected as healthy behavior by doing something that are not very nature friendly.
Yeah, I think we will move on, but there's one point which I definitely want to mention, which we're going to come to and speak to you about as well, is just from this, on the Al Hakam Inspire podcast, we do talk about Islamic principle as well. It just makes so much more sense that when you understand certain parts of your brain, which are so important for, like you're saying, productive activity and decision making, if you're tuning them off by taking these substances, it's, of course, you understand why Islam then dictates to Muslims not to drink alcohol and not to take these substances, because it's just a more healthier for human beings as a whole. So thank you for that. It's a really crucial point, I think.
Let's get a little bit deeper into kind of the cognition side, how the mind works, what parts of the brain control the process of thought. And in particular, how does this relate to the spiritual element? So when we talk about religion and spirituality, is there a role for the activity of the brain and any part of the brain which is influencing or affecting the kind of progress that we make, our spiritual or religious progress?
Let's try to quickly define the two terms, the very technical terms, before we try to discuss this further. So cognition is, in simple words, our ability to make sense of what's happening around us. So our ability to understand things and then making decisions and determining our behavior. And some cognitive scientists would also argue that our emotions respond to our cognition. So if I understand a certain situation to be friendly, I'm going to feel more relaxed. If my thought tells me that this is probably not a very safe place, I'm going to feel a bit more anxious, or may want to leave from that environment. So that's our cognition. Spirituality is not as much of a technical term.
Mm.
However, it carries a lot more wider meaning, particularly in the modern day society.
Mm.
The original meaning of spirituality is to try to relate to not just the what's happening around us, which is cognition, but to the cause, the ultimate cause of what's around us, the laws of nature. What's behind those laws of nature? Where do they come from? And why are they the way they are? Now, that's our spiritual link to nature. And someone who commits to an organized religion would define it as an ability or a degree of their relationship to the ultimate cause, which is the Almighty Creator, God. However, there may be people who don't commit to religion in any organized way. They also describe having spiritual experiences sometimes in relation to
Right.
having had a walk in a very beautiful natural environment by the lake in a beautiful weather. Yes, and they're probably describing a psychological experience of a similar nature, which is that they were able to connect to the natural laws and find it a beautiful experience, and sometimes even to unnatural situations like a beautiful piece of music. So valid as far as the experience goes. But having said that, we need to try to differentiate between the two degrees of spirituality.
Hmm.
If our cognition allows us to relate to just the natural environments, it does not put a lot of pressure on us in terms of our behavior. So that person can choose to go for the same walk another day or not to, and that's their decision. But having said that, if somebody tries to use their cognition, which is their ability to relate to things around them, and try to connect to the ultimate cause of what's around them, the laws, the creator of nature, and not just the natural laws, then there comes an expectation on them of self-discipline. Now, this is huge in terms of why people sometimes shy away from trying to recognize the ultimate cause behind all laws of nature. Because that self-discipline is hard. All sorts of self-discipline is hard. These days it's a fasting month for us. We have to wake up earlier in the morning. Sometimes we're feeling tired, but we've got to say our prayers, do our food in the morning, and then get on with our day, even if sometimes we're feeling thirsty or hungry. So the self-discipline, the pressure of the self-discipline prevents people from recognizing the authority of that ultimate cause. And that's where the cognition is used to a lesser degree compared to someone who is using it to go full extent into their spirituality.
How would you differentiate here between self-discipline? So I guess the question is, why would people exert self-discipline in worldly terms? So if they're a businessman and they want to really promote their business, or if they're a student and they really want to get good marks, how would you, in your view, kind of um, explain why they would go towards that and not spirituality? Because I understand what you're saying. A lot of the issue with religion, in terms of people wanting to take up religion, is that there are too many rules. I remember a lot of my friends, they would admire Islam, but they would say it's very difficult for us to accept Islam because of all the rules, right? And this was like in secondary school. So I understand exactly what you're saying. But why would it be that people are going after other self disciplines and not their spiritual beings, if you like?
I suppose the factor is, what do they give themselves as the goal of their life? And what are the parameters that they think are helpful to measure the success in their own mind, in their own life?
Right.
But I would say that it can potentially be a dangerous path, because there's a self-determination theory of human psychology. What it tells us is that our mind works towards some goals. It develops some goals, sometimes at a subconscious level, when we may not be fully aware of what our minds picked up as a goal, and then works towards achieving that goal. Now, if we have a constructive goal, like progress, helping mankind, professional development, learning and knowledge, whatever, or relating to our creator, then that is the goal that the person's self-discipline would help them guide towards. But those who don't have conscious effort made towards constructive goals, their mind would then, the gap in their mind would be filled up by self-created goals. So, for example, these days, our society, you would hear people saying, oh, I want success in life. And by success, basically, they mean more money, bigger house, bigger
Yeah.
car, better job, more power. That's what is seen as success in a materialistic society. Now, what it means is a life goal of materialism, irrespective of its impact on fellow human beings in the same country, but also in other parts of the world. There'd be another person whose brain may pick up as a goal as, this is my life. Now, what does it mean? That I want to do what I prefer to do, and I don't care what other people think. Now, this has a risk of taking us towards selfishness, because there may be people who suffer because of our decisions in life. Our family members may suffer. I may, not myself, sorry, but somebody may choose to go for gambling despite losing a lot of money. Now, it's not just them who are going to suffer, their family is going to suffer too. But they will say, it's my life. And similarly, they can be like, let's live the life to a full. All they mean is pleasure seeking, hedonism, yet again, social problems as a consequence.
Yeah.
So, self-discipline towards a constructive goal, helpful. Otherwise, you will end up having some kind of a goal which is probably going to expect some discipline from you, but would have negative consequences.
One more question, which are just sticking on this topic of religion and spirituality, is there's a lot of books out now which talk about how organized religion, you referred to organized religion, are basically a construct of the mind and evolutionary psychology. And I guess one of the arguments in that is that before, human beings didn't understand a lot of things, and they would attribute that to superstition, which they say is God. And also, another aspect would be that, human beings like cooperation, and therefore they needed to live in communities, and therefore religion was born because it was a good um, good binder, basically. But yeah, I wanted to see your take on that.
Religion definitely is a good binder. So, in that
Yeah,
aspect, I would agree with them. But if
yeah,
we look at the history of the development of society, then we know that the cities or the communities began to form about 10 to 15,000 years ago, when farming began in human history. Before that, it was more like a nomadic lifestyle or hunting gathering kind of lifestyle. But having said that, since communities have begun, if we look at the history, there have been different religions that have been brought by their founding prophets, may peace be on all of them. And history gives us clear evidence that every time there's been an introduction of religion and worship of a higher being, the ultimate creator, not just that the societies bound well with each other, but that they lived for the sake of mutual welfare. They benefited from each other's presence. So there was more trust, there was more justice, there was more communal activity together, or charitable activity, looking after the less privileged within that society. And there was much less of aggravation and turmoil and violence. Now, this is not just true with Islam, although Islam took it to its excellence, and we can also touch on why we believe that Islam is the peak of religious evolution. But having said that, all founding prophets, and you could start from Prophet Adam to Noah to Abraham to Moses, Krishna, Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, may peace and blessings be on all of them. And all of their disciples and societies, in fact, demonstrated this goodness in them. And having said that, after some time, when their adherence to the original teachings drifted away, then society started shifting away towards atheism. So atheism is not new. It's not a byproduct of the modern scientific development. It's come in history in cycles, and so has God-fearingness in societies. So that we've gone in cycles.
I just want to kind of jump in there with regards to, I mean, the Promised Messiah, the founder of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community, he discusses this in his book, The Philosophy of the Teachings of Islam, where people in society often are able to, he discusses kind of three stages of human development: the natural state of man, then guided by the moral state of man, and then progression to the spiritual state of man. And there's this very interesting point where he says that many people in society who reject religion, or atheists who don't kind of believe in the existence of God, they will achieve in fact, in some cases, the highest kind of stage of morality. They'll conquer their natural self and guide it with morality, but they'll never be able to achieve that spirituality, that higher stage of guiding your morality and progressing in your spirituality. So what impact does that have? And is there kind of any scientific evidence for showing that being more religious, activates certain parts of the brain or provides that kind of physical progression that a human being needs to stabilize and have good mental health as well?
Right. Okay. Yes. Let me try to first give some evidence of scientific studies that demonstrate this relationship between belonging to an organized religion and improvement in mental health. And then we can also look at some spiritual examples.
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
One thing is very clear from the studies that have come up in the last 2 or 3 decades, and they're increasing. Very interestingly, the focus on such studies trying to measure the improvement of mental health in relation to religion is increasing in the psychiatric circles.
Yeah.
And they're coming from Scandinavia or California, a few from Japan, Australia, so worldwide. And they're demonstrating one thing very clearly. The common theme is that the capability to cope with stress is improved in people who commit to organized religion. The incidence, which means the number of new cases of anxiety or depression, is reduced in members who belong to organized religion, and they compare members who belong to organized religions. Mostly 3 Abrahamic religions are included, so Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But a few studies have included members of other religions too. And they compare this to either people who have no religion or people who are actively atheistic. So this is the findings. And the third finding that's coming out of such studies is that if some members do develop a psychiatric condition, a mental health problem, then they fare better if they were part of an organized religious community. So they're likely to experience less severe symptoms or recover quicker. Now, McCullough, Larson, Gartner, these are all in the last 20 years studies. Then there is another set of evidence that people who, the studies that relate to replacing the negative cognitions, which is a perception of a person who's anxious or depressed about their environment, that something drastic is going to happen. Now, this is how a person experiences when they're in a panic attack. Something drastic is going to happen to me. They feel so anxious, even though they are not actually at risk, but it's their cognition telling them this. Now, the studies that are looking at people, helping them replace these negative cognitions with religious-based positive cognitions. That look, you've got your worship done. You know that supplications have worked for you in your life in the past. And this time, even if you're feeling very anxious or fearful, this will help you again. And people's therapies have worked and demonstrated positive outcomes by using these religious-based psychotherapies. So there are different kinds of studies now coming out demonstrating the positive relationship between religion and mental health issues. But if we look at the spiritual example, which was another part of your question, the best example of raised spiritual status is what we know of are the founding prophets of all religions. And each one of them was persecuted and opposed in a very strong way by worldly authorities or powers much stronger than them in worldly strength. Sometimes they were kings, and sometimes they were armies, and sometimes they were heads of tribes, whatever. However, despite all that stress and difficulty, these people and their immediate followers, whose spiritual status would also benefit from them following this role model, the founding prophet, they did not develop the same kind of anxieties and stresses and depressions. In fact, the calmness in their life to their fellow human beings, to their families, was exemplary. And you and I can relate hundreds of such stories from the followers of Prophet Muhammad, may peace be on him. But the point is established there, that there is a very clear link between belonging to an organized religion and improvement in mental health.
Just very quickly on that, I just think that it's so important nowadays. You know, we see hundreds of patients in clinic for both anxiety, depression, and we're very quick to kind of hand out medicines, antidepressants, medication to help them control their anxiety attacks and things, and give them that calm state without getting to the root cause of the issue. And quite often I find that we're masking a lot of the kind of the symptoms that they're having, not getting to the root cause. And there are elements, I remember doing a bit of research a few years ago looking at kind of rates of suicide amongst young adult males, particularly in Scotland. And what we found was that religion was a hugely protective factor. It provided a sense of community, and the rate was significantly better off in religious communities. So thank you for sharing the studies and evidence with us as well.
I think also just kind of continuing from there, why is it, of course, we're thinking human beings, there's a lot going on in our mind, but on the worldly side of it, or the current situation where we're in right now, why is it that in your view so many anxieties and mental health problems have risen? Like they've, it's everywhere. What's the reason? Is it our society, social media, our diet? What's happening?
Just to quickly recap the kind of mental disorders that exist, and then perhaps we can understand this point better. So the mental disorders broadly can be categorized into one thing is the neurodevelopmental disorders, which are chromosomal abnormalities present right from birth. Somebody may be special needs or autism spectrum, and that's they're likely to experience it for a lot of their life. Then there is the organic brain disorders, which is like if somebody has epilepsy or has a road traffic accident with brain injury and therefore develops certain types of psychiatric symptoms. So that is very directly linked to having an accident, could happen to anybody. Psychotic illnesses, where you lose contact with reality, you begin to believe in things that in fact don't exist around you. Now, 1 to 3% of the population worldwide experiences this kind of illnesses, requires very formal treatment, including medication, which was one of Hasham's earlier point. But then is a set of disorders, which is our response to our environment. So all the time, our psychological capability and the stressors around us are in a bit of a struggle. If our psychological capability is strong enough, we will keep coping with the stressors. There is no life without stress. Even crossing a busy traffic street, you feel that thing. You need to be sure that the traffic has stopped at the red light and then you cross, etc. Raising children, all those things, day-to-day life things. But sometimes, for some reason, people's coping mechanisms are overwhelmed. And that's when they experience these reactionary anxieties and depression. So I suppose your question is primarily linked to this set of syndromes. And they are the ones which are on the increase. WHO has found it in their studies. COVID did not help because that was a huge stressor, Millions of people were testing positive and a few million died. A sad, big global event. So everybody felt some degree of stress. And I think almost everybody knew someone who had died. So this was a huge stressor. And similarly, the connection with health services was disrupted. But besides COVID, it is also true that things that normally help our coping skills are slowly being eroded. So let's begin from our social structures in society, the family system, which is our immediate source of support. For children, it's the parents. For parents, it's the children or spouses, partners, and then extended family. We know in society that the family infrastructure has been eroded, particularly in certain parts of the world. Now, the immediate source of support is less available, that means. Similarly, we talked about those not so healthy goals. So if somebody is going to want to live a life for their own sake, that means if out of 10, 5 people are living that way, or 6 people are living that way, those 6 people are not available for each other because they're prioritizing their own activity on the weekend rather than going to a night out in a club.
Helping.
To think of like my elderly neighbor needs a bit of time and I should spend time with them. So that thing increases a general sense of anxiety. Similarly, in our employments and works, we are so regulated as a matter of defense against litigation that the professional creativity is being snubbed. The medics experience it. The police are experiencing it. The engineers and lawyers are experiencing it. School teachers are experiencing it. Everybody is complaining. And you see all these frustrations coming out in the form of strikes. Not a healthy reaction, but it's happening to society. Of course, that leads to a general sense of less of a well-being, less support, less being listened to, and feeling lonely despite having these anxieties. So this is why we have an increase in anxieties and depressions. We see the rights of people being impinged very directly in our clinics. So a person who's been unemployed would not have enough appointment with their social worker. A patient who needs a doctor would have to wait for weeks and weeks and sometimes months.
Yeah.
Women's rights, such a big issue as far as a political statement is concerned, but genuinely we see women coming to clinics who have not been able to get the support that a woman deserves, the respect that a woman deserves in society. That should have been an integral part of society, but they don't experience it. And that's why I think that we have this unfortunate situation.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to bring in kind of your personal research that you've done. You've analyzed, investigated, and looked at various aspects of Islam, Islamic teachings, and researched on the Holy Quran. From your investigation, your analysis, and in your opinion, what can we learn from Islam and the Holy Quran in particular? And do you think that it's a positive or good guiding sense for further research for the future, in particular in relation to mental health?
Yes, it's it's amazing, but also for us, it's always been the way that we see the Holy Quran as effective guidance in all aspects of life. So you've raised the point about mental health. So let's look at some of the examples of how the Holy Quran touches the issue of mental health. The point that we were discussing just now about the increased incidences of anxieties and depressions, Quran describes in chapter 16, verse 91, three creative principles. And this is about absolute justice, and then kindness, and then kinship, in terms of progressive order of the spiritual status of a human being. Now, in a secular society, you would think that they would argue that if a society can achieve the state of justice, this is brilliant. This is the top-notch achievement. Quran does not consider the concept of justice as such. The basic that is expected of a Muslim or a Muslim government or society is, the term used is absolute justice. So nepotism has no way, bribery has no place in these things, or the modern day relationship between the politics and the business side of the world does not fare well in this Islamic society. So that's one thing. But this is the baseline standard. Anything below, you're not conforming to Quranic guidance. If you achieve absolute justice, then which means that you have given definitely the rights of everybody who deserves what they deserve, then the expectation is to go further and achieve the status of kindness, which means give up some of your space, your rights, your wealth, your time, your attention or energy for somebody else. This is kindness. And then Quran says that this is also partial improvement. The ultimate aim is the standard of kinship, the level of kindness that a mother or a father would do for their children. There is no expectation of a return or a response or a favor to be done back to you. So that is the level of goodness or righteousness that is expected in the Holy Quran. Now, if you create a society like this, the people who live in this society are going to experience a lot more peace, mental peace. They're less likely to feel vulnerable even if they're unwell or lonely or have lost their family member, because others would treat them as their kin.
Sorry, I just wanted to comment on this. I really like how you've addressed that, because whenever on social media as well, and different platforms, a lot of people are talking about, like, I guess, behavioral things that they can do. So things that are very important, like exercise and good diet and stuff. That's all very, very important. But I think what you're alluding to right now is even more important, where your structure and your society is supporting everyone, is helping everyone. And in this hedonistic society we're living in the West especially, that's completely dismantled, and we don't have that support structure and the absolute justice, which our current Khalifa of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community is also, has been speaking about for years and years and years, and been stressing that we need absolute justice around the world, and these other elements as well. So yeah, thank you for that. That's so crucial, I think, in addressing modern day anxieties and mental health issues.
And the Holy Quran touches on different types of psychological approaches to ailments as well. So, for example, one of the verses, we were talking about nature earlier, that's chapter 30, verse 31. Set your face to religion with devotion and follow the laws of nature, according to
Yeah.
which the Creator fashioned mankind. So God is guiding us to try to live according to the laws of nature, to be compatible with nature. There is a school of psychology which is about the psychodynamics, which implies that there are some kind of subconscious forces that determine our ways of thinking, our behaviors, and our attitudes. So the Quran, 1400 years ago. Now, this was founded by Sigmund Freud, as you may know, and this is only 100 years or so ago. So Allah is aware of our innermost feelings and thoughts, even ones that we may not be aware of. So we're talking about, this is chapter 16, verses 7 to 8. Allah Mia is making us aware that there's a part of you that you may not consciously touch on, but then goes on to guide us how to utilize this subconscious drive in ourselves. The practice of meditation, our obligatory prayers, as well as the extra prayers that we are guided to do, they are in fact an attempt by the human being to try to get in touch with their own person, recognize their difficulties and shortcomings, and improve themselves as a human being to try to meet those standards, the creative principles that we earlier touched on. When we do a confession in psychotherapy or in some other religions to a clergy member, that still has that social stigma associated with it. But when you make a confession to an almighty, quietly in your own mind, trying to tap into your subconscious energy and speaking to your God, there is no social stigma attached to it. So the level of catharsis, which is a therapeutic principle in psychiatry, is of a much more profound degree in our prayers to God than in a psychotherapeutic setting. Quran, of course, says, the chapter 13, verse 29, we all know that our hearts will find peace when we think of and remember our Creator. Now, we have this verse inscribed on our mosques as well, don't we? Another profound verse is chapter 4, verse 111, and it talks about our guilt feelings. And Quran offers such a reassuring respite. You know, when we make a mistake, and we feel bad about it, and we're feeling nervous and apprehensive, Quran offers a reassurance that whoso does evil or wrongs his soul, but then asks forgiveness of Allah, will find Allah most forgiving and most merciful. So you and I should sit reassured that even if we remember our mistake, as long as we really now make an effort not to make the same mistake again and seek forgiveness from Allah, we're going to be forgiven. We're going to find Allah most forgiving. This is a very soothing and effective remedy for people's anxiety in society. In cognitive sciences, which is what we talked about earlier, God reassures us again that God is near to us. He is going to be listening to us. Chapter 2, verse 187. And then several verses where Allah reminds us that our difficulties, our stresses can be turned around to benefit us. They strengthen our ways of coping. You know, just like an athlete has to do some very painful exercise to strengthen their muscles, and only then they're going to become a gold medal winning athlete at some level. Similarly, at spiritual level, we need to face stress, overcome it to feel stronger and stand stronger for the rest of our lives. So that guidance has come from the Holy Quran.
I think on that point, there's a lot, even now, a lot of discussion online about, embracing the grit, embracing pain, going through pain, just even if there's stresses in your life, just going through it and coming out as a more stronger mentally person. Like you said, the Quran emphasizes that Inna Allah ma'as sabirin, that Allah is with the people who are patient. So that's a great point, because right now that there's a whole online discussion on this as well, about just going through that mental stress or pain, coming out as a stronger person. I think on that, then we will. It's been a brilliant discussion, Dr. Shakeel, and I think a lot of our audience members in fact, I'm pretty sure they will love to listen to this podcast and also gain a lot of benefit from it as well, and especially your whole Quranic element. In fact, I would love for you to write an article for us in Al Hakam as well on the Quran and mental and dealing with anxieties and these things. It'll be really brilliant. I think a lot of people will benefit from that. But yeah, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for this interesting discussion and for you running this program.
Thank you for listening to the Al-Hakam Inspire podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. Visit our socials on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube at Al-Hakam Inspire. And of course, subscribe to our YouTube channel and leave your comments there. We would love to hear your feedback and thoughts, so send us an email to inspire@alhakam.org.